The last year, as we have had the pandemic, has been a bit challenging, I think, for everybody. The pandemic has opened my eyes to how much Christ wants us to live a life in relationship and in communion with Him continually. The pandemic has shown us how the church is not bound to walls and how we can have churches in our very own homes, how we and our bodies are very temples in which God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus come in and make their dwelling in.
Hi, my name is Michael Oquincich Cruz, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership, CSPL for short. We are a grassroots, faith-based coalition that does community organizing work rooted in the Catholic spiritual and theological traditions. We work to co-form and co-train leaders in grassroots communities to effectively engage in their neighborhoods, in their city, in their region, to work for social justice, racial justice, economic justice, through civic engagement in public life. And we do this through leadership training, spiritual and theological formation, coalition building, relationship building, and taking action on the issues that impact our communities most deeply.
It was very important for us to reach out to this community and let them know that we were working hard to make sure that resources were available, that they were aware of what was being done. So we came up with great partnerships, collaborations with our local trustees, with local not-for-profit organizations like CEDA, churches like Sacred Heart and St. Eulalia, Rock of Ages, a lot of churches in the area. We came up with a lot of plans and ways to support. One of those was food distributions. We decided as a census team to go out there and start promoting the census. And we started online, and then once we were able to be out in the field, it was tremendous work. And we never realized how it would be like a double blessing, because we were getting out the word about this census work and also at the same time promoting food distributions, promoting mask giveaways, promoting hand sanitizer giveaways, and people were so grateful for that.
One of the co-ops that we were working with is a catering co-op, and they lost probably 90 to 95% of their business, so they lost almost everything. The women thought about, instead of providing food for their clients, that maybe they could come together and create and sew protective masks that could be donated to places where would be in need of these protective masks, but also be able to sell their product to clients in Chicago. And so CSPL, we came together as a team and we helped the co-op create a website, promote their product, test their product, and they also made this out of reusable fabric so that they could also do a environmental friendly project. Churches came together to donate fabric. People came together to also become clients and purchase the masks. And in the first month, the women sold over 3,000 masks. This was one way that the women reimagine and reshape their co-op.
Le doy gracias a Dios por esta manifestación. Le doy gracias a Dios por el público que está aquí presente. Sigamos luchando. ¿Qué queremos? ¡Justicia! ¿Para quién? ¡Para Vanessa! ¿Cuándo la queremos? ¡Ahorita! ¡Justicia para Vanessa! ¡Justice for Vanessa!
The other thing that we've been really working on throughout the year was also advocating for women's rights and against gender-based violence. When we see the case of Vanessa Guillen, we were also there advocating for her and standing in solidarity with her family and other women who came out to say Me Too, who were part of the Me Too movement.
Those first few weeks and months of the pandemic were really pivotal. I look back on them now and I'm amazed and inspired beyond belief in terms of how our members responded to this crisis. Rather than giving in and giving up, they leaned in further to the work that they all feel called to with CSPL and as Catholics. And in those first few months, we organized a massive campaign to reopen a hospital that had been previously closed in 2019 called Westlake Hospital, located in Melrose Park. Maria Franco, a CSPL board member, a leader in the community here in Maywood, was very adamant, along with other leaders in CSPL, that we needed to work to reopen this hospital.
Opening up Westlake, which was a hospital that had closed in our community like a year before, was critical. The hospital was still in good condition. The hospital was still able to receive and needed very minimal upgrades. And so we joined the push with Representative Welch to get this hospital opened right in the midst of this very populated Black and brown community, which is Proviso Township. It was a great show of support, and it was a great show of solidarity with the community, and everybody was very happy to see it at least reopen temporarily as an inpatient COVID-19 assistance center, because it was very tragic and heartbreaking for the community to see it close to begin with. Standing up and doing something to make sure that no one had to have their sick loved one die beside them, that there was hope, that there was a hospital within 5 or 10 minutes to rush them to. That was tremendous to have that happen in our backyard.
So it's that sense of community, the commitment to relationship building, the commitment to solidarity, and to taking collective action that really moved our efforts forward, and that served in an ongoing way as a source of inspiration. And I think our folks needed that. I needed that. We all needed that, because with parishes shut down, for the most part, we needed to feel a sense of community and kinship. We needed a way in which we could express our faith through concrete works. And so this past year has been transformative. You know, for so many, this idea of seeing the world through a new lens has something that's been a common thread for a lot of people, a lot of our members, and for myself. We've known for so many years, because of the ways in which racial inequities, social inequities have shaped the lives of predominantly Black and brown communities, Native American communities, that's nothing new for so many, that we know that our country is built on a history of slavery, a history of genocide, colonialization, and that the inequities of today are reflected of these roots that go back hundreds and hundreds of years in our nation. And so what the pandemic has done is it's exacerbated what we already knew to be there underneath the surface, and it's inspired us to go further in our sense of calling to work for justice and to work for radical transformation of our communities.
We realize the disparity that the lack of access to technology, the lack of access to Wi-Fi that these families were facing. I mean, if you're a family that's already challenged, that doesn't have documents, that is struggling for work, and we know the service industry was the hardest hit. Many Latino or Hispanic undocumented families survive off of hotels, restaurants, dishwashing, all that went away. And on top of it, you had to provide a laptop for every single one of your children and good Wi-Fi. It was heartbreaking to see 2-3 kids, bunched in on one laptop or living off of government Wi-Fi, which was difficult. So we, of course, had to do something. We organized a back-to-school giveaway where we gave away USBs, we gave away printers, we gave away headphones, and we gave away a lot of gift cards to Target and Office Max to make sure that these families felt supported in this technology era, which many families faced the challenge. 4, 5, 6 kids couldn't afford to even put food on the table, much less go and buy headphones and USBs and laptops for everybody.
There's a huge divide in the health, education, economic, and many of the aspects of life. There's so much divide between those who have and those who have not. Right? The rich and the poor, that widened and widened and widened during this pandemic, and it was very obvious that we were living in an economy that was not serving us all equally, that an economy that was very exclusive, and an economy that made some very, very rich and many very, very poor.
Meeting people where they're at, for me, that is like the ground rule for this type of work. You cannot tell people what they need to hear. You need to listen to them, and hear their cries and hear their suffering and even see their suffering when they don't even ask. You can kind of anticipate what they're going through. The work is not over. This pandemic has opened up our eyes to a lot of inequalities. One thing that was really hurtful for the community was everybody getting stimulus and these families falling through the cracks and not receiving the stimulus because they were undocumented, yet their children are U.S. citizens and have every right to receive that support. And however, they were left out of several stimulus packages. They were left out of a lot of resources because they didn't have those precious 9 numbers. You know, one parent didn't have it, so the whole family suffered. It was really, really heartbreaking for that. So I know our work is not over until everybody has a right to everything that everybody has. Every citizen has the same right to access everything. So until we can spread that message, our work is not done.
We've also worked very tirelessly, making sure that people know what voting is all about, how to vote, how to register to vote, how to make sure that their voices are heard. Hosting the very first public meeting as an organization a few days ago, making sure that we give the community a platform in which their voices can be heard, in which they feel empowered and powerful, and in which as well we hear from our candidates and know what it is that they want to do for our communities.
As we come to the end of our meeting, we must all remember that we have an office, which is probably one of the most important offices there is, and that is the office of residents and community leaders. And as residents and community leaders, we have the power to choose who represents us and who stands in place to implement laws that protect us. That power is through building a grassroots movement where we engage every week and every month of the year through our votes. Tonight wouldn't be as effective if we all left here and went to our beds without showing up when election season comes.
In the past year as well, I think just staying indoors can kind of play with people mentally. We've seen a rise in mental health crisis. We've seen how certain people have not known how to handle such crises. That pushed me and led me to getting trained and becoming a mental health first aid instructor. And in turn, we had a first training where we gave people skills on how they can become first aiders in their communities. How can they know the signs and symptoms of a person going through a mental health crisis or a mental health challenge and disorder or a moment, so that we make sure that we have communities that are healthy, communities that have people who are aware, who are educated, who are trained, who have the right skills in them to be able to recognize these things and to make sure that we do not lose life.
We know that going back from the pandemic, we will never be the same, and we shouldn't be the same. By being in proximity with the people, we know that now when we go back, we have to continue working for a more inclusive economy. We have to work with one another as brothers and sisters to make the change possible. We know that many of the people we love, they will no longer be with us because they lost their lives during this time of pandemic. And we owe it to them, and we owe it to the people who were in the front lines to continue answering the call of working for a better world, for working for a more just and inclusive economy.
So I'm going to offer some ecclesiological underpinnings that connect the pontificate of Pope Francis with the work of the CSPL. I see lots of intersection points between the thought of Pope Francis and where this great organization is doing grassroots work to change their community. Let Us Dream in its analysis of both the challenges and opportunities that the pandemic creates in our world today, they intersect and they overlap with Pope Francis's vision of the church in many ways. And so lots of the themes of Pope Francis's ecclesiology, things like proximity and the culture of encounter, they're deeply rooted in the work of the CSPL. And in many ways, it's a reflection or a reaction to his unique vision of ecclesiology. He offered what he calls an inverted pyramid ecclesiology. And I see this so directly impacting the work of the CSPL and the grassroots organizing that they do. In this
modified version of ecclesiology, or corrected version in many ways. It has the people at the top of the pyramid. So the pyramid is flipped upside down. And it has the people at the top as the sort of engine driving the church, changing the reality of the world. Beneath them, you have ministers. And remember that the word minister comes from minus, meaning less. And you can sort of play with that in some ways, versus verses, or in conversation with magis, more, magisterium, the master, to get a master's degree, if you will. And so the two can't be bifurcated. They're in conversation with one another. But in this new vision, the ministers serve to uphold and undergird the people, to support the people in their agency and activity and dynamic change of the world and of the church. And so they're supporting the people. And then the Pope in this vision is at the bottom of the pyramid as the sort of point of unity. One of his favorite phrases or descriptors of the papacy is the servant of the servants of God. And so you have the entire pyramid is inverted, is flipped, and so that the people are driving the vision of the future. And I think that resonates with the text we're exploring here, Let Us Dream. Brad Hinsey's work, an ecclesiologist at Fordham University, one of my own mentors, and he ties community organizing, connected again to the work of the CSPL very directly, with what he calls the grace of conflict. And so he says, when conflict is properly understood, of course we have the idea that there are connotations of violence, disruption, destruction of relationships. They are real elements of conflict, but it can also, he says, disclose and actualize the power of God's grace, the mysterious self-communication of God to humanity, which is at work in subject formation of individuals and groups. So conflict can play a role in our development of our agency to act within the church, the academy, and the world in some ways. So if you think about this, think about how does conflict work in this way. It's around things like prophetic defiance, reclamation of a perspective of giftedness for threatened and precarious communities. There's a Jesuit principle called agere contra, which can mean doing the opposite, but it's not necessarily this counteraction as it is a resistance, a prophetic resistance. And all of this is part of Brad's wider calls for what he describes as prophetic obedience, for the constitutive element of agency of the holy people of God.
I think when we talk about community organizing, we usually think that it's something beyond us. I can't possibly do it. And when we talk on our podcast, we help people understand that anybody can do it. That we usually tend to look for help elsewhere. We are looking for answers elsewhere, where else Christ is calling each and every one of us. When we read the Bible, we see that God didn't go looking for superhumans. He didn't go looking for politicians or only, if we should say, Pharisees or kings. Normal everyday people doing their normal day lives, just like you and I. And that's who God is looking for. God is looking for us to represent Him in everything that we do. And if anything else, I would like us to bear that in mind, that we are meant to be His ambassadors in everything that we do. And as we go through these challenges, let us bear that in mind. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. That everything we go through is for a reason. And that these times of isolation and times when God brings us and sets us apart and closes us in a place are meant for a reason, for us to hear Him more distinctly, for us to feel Him, for us to be more and more attached to Him.
This pandemic has taught so many of us that the church and our faith lives on beyond the four walls of the church, that it is in community with one another, that it is being out on the streets with one another, that it is encountering other people in the work, that it's also embodied in taking action together and showing up and organizing a press conference and calling our public officials to task and creating tension that seeks to bring God's justice into the world. This pandemic has revealed not only the deep fissures in our society and our world, but also that God is still with us. Whether we're in the four walls of the church or whether we're out on a street corner talking to people about the importance of elections or the census, or whether we're out protesting and organizing a march, that God is there, beyond the four walls of the church. And this is something that Pope Francis has often encouraged us to think about and reflect on as people of faith.